So we started to look at arrays, and the first thing we want to do is make sure we have a good mental picture of what an array looks like in the memory of a computer, and this is going to help us think about how to use it. So what I've done here is on the left hand side of the screen we have our program, and on the right hand side over here we have a little picture of what memory looks like. So here we have memory, and inside it we have the main. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to declare an integer. So we say int a, or so say int I equals 9. We can declare characters. Char c equals a. We can declare doubles. Double d equals 0. And these are called primitive variables because what happens is the computer goes and it saves a little chunk of space for that variable I and puts the number 9 in it. It saves a little chunk of space for that variable C and puts the letter A in it. It saves a little chunk of space for that variable D and puts the value 0 in it. These are called primitive types because all programming languages need the same amount of memory for integers, characters, and doubles. Another variable we looked at this year is called a string. And at the start of the year I said a string is a little different. A string is called a reference variable because I say string S and I might put the word Paul in. So what the computer does is in the main memory it's going to find a little spot. It's going to call that spot S so I can always find it. And it won't put Paul inside of that space because it doesn't know how much space it needs. What it's going to do is save a little space for that word specifically called Paul. And then in the space S it's going to store the memory location of where that lives. That's why it's called a reference variable, because the variable location is referencing the actual value. Now, a problem that students were noticing with their games was that they often had need for a large number of variables that did very similar things. So let's say, for example, a lot of integers that stored how many guesses it took to get each question. So let's say their game wanted to keep track of how many times they got each question wrong and then display it at the end. They'd have to store that. So typically, with the skills we have now, we'd need a variable for question 1, question 2, question 3 to keep track of this. Well, there's a structure in Java which allows us to group together variables of a similar type, and that's called an array. An array is a reference variable, and it's a little different than a string, but it's a reference variable nonetheless. So we can make arrays of anything. We can make arrays of integers, characters, doubles, strings. So let's make an array of characters. So I'm going to declare a character just like I normally would, and then to show that it's an array, I'm going to put square braces after it. And then I'm going to give the name of this. I'm going to call this C array. And I'm going to say this is equal to. So what this first part does is it creates a spot in memory, and it calls it C array. And what it knows is that it's an array, but I need to know how many spots that it's going to need. So I have to tell the computer that. So I'm going to say create a new array of characters, and now I'm going to tell it how many. So I might want 5. And what that does is it then goes out into memory and it takes 5 spots of memory, and then this variable points to where it lives. I could do that also for integers. I could say int, and I could call this I array, new int, and we'll make this 3. And so what that does is that's going to make another space and call that I array. And then the computer is going to reserve 3 spots, and then it's going to point to that. Now you might notice the one difference between arrays and primitive types is that when I declare, for example, int I assign it a value of 9. When I see, I assign it a value of a. But the arrays, I've just created the space but haven't put anything in it. So Java, when you create an array, actually will set the values for you. Integers will be set to 0 for you, and characters will be set to a special character. And that special character is something that we'll talk about a little more in future videos. In the next video, we're going to look at how to access individual elements within an array.